Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel and another one of my silly little lectures. My name is Cree Miles and I'm obviously having a hard time deciding whether or not what I'm doing is going to be like a full-on podcast or not. I like how accessible podcast and audio work is, and I'm trying hard to figure out what I'm doing here and if it goes along with the Trap Poet Society that I do with Brian. I've been deeply inspired to pursue content like this after discovering the Big Book Lady, and she put out this really awesome list of content creators she loved, like Shannon Kim and Noah Maria, and I really like how lo-fi all of their content is, and that it seems to be an emphasis on information or like cinematography and art, and not so much the performance of the information, which I think is heavily emphasized in shorter content. I still want to tweak and refine fun edits for short form, but I really want a place where I can think deeply and expansively about how I'm experiencing the world. And I also want to use this platform as a place to fully produce a piece of content. Like I do research and I draft a script and I plan the lighting for filming, etc. Though I am committed to keeping like the edits pretty bare bones. I'm going to try and do cooler edits on short form content. I actually bought a course from Udemy about around Premiere Pro, and I'm going through that slowly right now. And I bought a course on Udemy for Adobe After Effects. So I'm going to be out here soon, but the only way to do it is to do it. So that's why I'm here. I'm extremely inspired by Janelle Iliana. Do you remember when she lived on that van? So she lived in that blue van with her snake Alfredo. Her edits are so beautiful right now. I'm really, really inspired by that. Anyway, let's get into it. Today, the center of the lecture is around the book Civil Rights Queen by Tomiko Brown-Nagin. I read this while I was also regularly consuming the mid-2000s sitcom Blackish. Those two things overlapped for me in consumption for about 5 weeks, which is how long it took me to read Civil Rights Queen. So regarding the book, I've now read the book twice. I read it when it originally came out, and I interviewed the author for the Penguin Random House vertical I curate, Always Black. And then I recently read it again from my February book club with my Patreon, the Trap Poet Society. The book is about Constance Baker Motley, whose career was so expansive, I'm struggling to give you the comprehensive overview. She was a trained lawyer at NYU in Columbia. She was a Black woman, and she graduated from NYU in 1943. And then she went to Columbia for law school. The book does detail the everyday racism and sexism that Baker had to endure in these environments, but it doesn't seem like Constance was ever deterred by the foolishness she had to survive. Reading it though, my cortisol levels definitely rose when she would experience the spaces that diminished or dismissed her. So I'm not saying that that didn't happen to her while she was going through this formal education. It just wasn't like the main focus of Brown-Nagin's analysis of Constance. She actually tried to go to an HBCU when she first graduated from high school, but she's from Connecticut originally, and something about the South just didn't bode well with her constitution. She isn't actually a Black American either. Her parents are both immigrants of the island Nevis, so that might also have something to do with all of it. So after graduating law school, she was hired by the Legal Defense Fund, and under the tutelage of Thurgood Marshall himself, she became their first Black woman lawyer, and she started fucking cooking. I know, like, she was the chief courtroom strategist for the civil rights movement. She successfully litigated cases that ended segregation in Memphis restaurants and whites-only lunch counters in Alabama. A callback to my previous lecture about Honey, she's the one who argued MLK's right to protest in Albany, Georgia in the first place. She got over 1,000 Black children reinstated in school after they were expelled for taking part in a street demonstration in 1963. She desegregated basically all of the higher institutions of learning in the South: the University of Georgia, the University of Mississippi, the University of Alabama, the University of Florida. She's also the reason sports journalists that are women are allowed in locker rooms. Like, we would not have the 2026 United States of America that we have if it wasn't for Constance Baker Motley. She was an architect of the civil rights movement, which also makes her an architect of this country. It is insane that the same amount of people that know who Thurgood Marshall is don't know who Constance Baker Motley is. And by insane, I mean it's just misogynoir. I was just in Memphis at the Lorraine Motel Civil Rights Museum, and unless I'm mistaken, the portion of the museum that they dedicated to the Legal Defense Fund made no mention of Constance Baker Motley. So it feels like she's literally being erased from history. So when I think about Constance Baker Motley's existence in public cultural memory, strictly on equitable terms, I think of the way she, like many Black women during the civil rights, Ella Baker, Dorothy Cotton, Fannie Lou Hamer, were reduced to a role akin to supporting cast, even though they were the masterminds behind a lot of the success of the civil rights. When we're talking equity, like just in terms of equity in cultural memory, the average American should know these women just like they know Martin Luther King Jr. and Thurgood Marshall. Plain and simple. But when I look past equality of celebration and I think about the role Constance Baker Motley played in advancing the ideology of respectability politics, the way that she argued the cases that she did, and because of the plaintiffs that she chose to represent, she helped inform the American concept of Blackness. And I would argue that she helped construct and enforce the Overton window of what socially acceptable Blackness is. And it all exists inside the oppressive framework of Americanism. So much internalized racism and misogyny that was on display as she did her job, like so many folks during the civil rights movement. The most outsourced form of American Blackness seems always to center whiteness and white comfort. And it makes sense because Blackness was in a lot of ways created by whiteness. I just had the privilege of sitting down with Imani Perry to talk about her 2025 release, Black and Blues. And we got to talking because inside the book, she spends an astronomical amount of time on etymology of words that we all very well know, like Africa, for example. But she said she did this because a lot of times we take these words for granted and they were placed up on people choosing these words. They weren't naming themselves. And a large reason she did that was because of the tired argument that Africans sold themselves into slavery. She asserts that because of the numerous identities and nations and tribes that were on this ginormous continent, people were selling each other into slavery who had no allegiance to each other. It would be like during World War II, people being shocked that Europeans were bombing and harming each other. It would be like if during World War II, people were shocked that Europeans were bombing and harming each other, as if Europe didn't have a multitude of cultures and identities. But we know that because white folks are presented to us as three-dimensional beings, full humans, and Black folks, Africans, don't always get that luxury. And I think that's where Blackish comes in. Prior to this year, I had never watched an episode of Blackish. I did watch Grownish, which was the spinoff of The Oldest Child Going Away to College. It was all very fun and light, and the entire series is obviously reminiscent of what Bill Cosby was doing in the 80s and 90s. But just as a general level set, this is what I pulled about Blackish from Wikipedia, so I'm going to give it to you guys. Blackish, stylized as Blackish, is an American sitcom television series created by Kenya Barris. It aired on ABC from September 24th, 2014 to April 19th, 2022, running for 8 seasons with 175 episodes. Blackish follows an upper-class, well-off Black family headed by Andre Dre Johnson, a successful advertising executive played by Anthony Anderson, and his wife Rainbow, an anesthesiologist who is played by Tracy Ellis Ross. The show revolves around the wealthy Johnson family as they juggle personal, familial, and socio-political issues, particularly in trying to reconcile their desire to stay true to their Black identities with their choice to live in a wealthy suburban white neighborhood. The show also features confident oldest child Zoe, that's Yara Shahidi, nerdy elder son Andre Jr., aka Junior, played by Marcus Scribner, and twins Jack, Miles Brown, and Diane Marseille Martin. In later seasons, additional characters include Dre's mother, Ruby Johnson, who's played by the incomparable Jennifer Lewis, and Earl Johnson, played by the incomparable Lawrence Fishburne. Throughout its run, Blackish received positive reviews. The show received an Emmy and Golden Globe nomination for Outstanding Comedy Series and a THCA Award for Outstanding Achievement in Comedy. While Ross received individual praise, winning the Golden Globe Award. Ross received individual praise, winning the Golden Globe Award for Best Actress, Television Series, Musical, or Comedy for her role as Beau. So occasionally, Blackish has some almost clever critiques. Okay, so occasionally Blackish has some what? Okay, so occasionally Blackish does have some almost clever critiques. So one episode that I think they did well was around trick-or-treating and what that looks like in our economically stratified and racially segregated society. The Johnsons live in an affluent white neighborhood, as you guys know, and the show uses words like neighborhood with the good candy to signal that. During trick-or-treating, a lot of times kids from socioeconomically disadvantaged neighborhoods come into the Johnsons' neighborhood to go trick-or-treating. All of this is because of redlining, and Blackish never explicitly says that, though I'm not sure why. It doesn't seem like something that would be outside of their purview, and I'll come back to what their purview is later. But one thing that they did do really well is how the white neighborhood reacted to the kids coming from outside their neighborhood. The Johnsons have this white neighbor named Janine that decides, because last year some of the visiting trick-or-treaters got a little more turned up, that the neighborhood hired a safety ambassador for trick-or-treating that night. So he's basically a cop. He doesn't have legal power to arrest or detain anyone, but he literally has a taser. Rich folks... Rich white folks responding to discomfort with repression was just so spot on to me. But back to my point about Blackish and redlining, I feel like Blackish always gives you like the high level overview. I call it the NPR treatment of most American history as it relates to Black folks' time in this country. They've done it with policing, they did it with the election and how Black folks generally vote along party lines. They did it with names and how Black sounding ones can decrease your chances for advancement or hiring in the workplace. The information is helpful but limited, and they never really venture outside of the constructs of Americanism. So the definition of Americanism that I'm pulling from is, again, from Imani Perry's Black and Blues. The end of the book in the chapter Old Blues. The definition of Americanism I'm pulling from is, again, from Imani Perry's Black and Blues. Toward the end of the book, in the chapter Old Blue Eyes, New Blacks, she's talking about Toni Morrison and August Wilson's critique of Americanism, the idea that integration and patriarchy and wealth could repair us. And those are the institutions that I see upheld by both Blackish and Constance Baker Motley's career and work. I specifically think about the attempt to integrate the University of Alabama. In the early 1950s, I think it's really clear. I specifically think about the attempt to integrate the University of Alabama in the early 1950s. I think it's a really clear picture that demonstrates where Motley stood in relationship to Americanism, and it causes me to dream about what we could have built if she and the architects of the civil rights movement at large would have been more critical of it. So this story starts with a woman named Polly Ann Myers. She is the person who instigated the effort to desegregate the University of Alabama. She had long been active in the youth chapter of the NAACP. She already graduated from undergrad at the HBCU Miles College. She was a reporter for the Birmingham World, and she also worked part-time for Ruby Hurley, who was the regional director of the NAACP. When Polly told Ruby what she was trying to do, Ruby encouraged her to enact the buddy system. As you can hopefully imagine, desegregating an institution of higher learning in the American South would take nerves of steel, and it would be nice to have someone to do it with you. So Polly talks to her homie Lucy, who had also graduated from Miles College, and talks her into doing this with her. So they start the process. They both apply, they get in, they give their deposits, etc., and then they go in person to register for classes. And of course, the University of Alabama is shook. Who is these Negras? And bing, bang, boom, the Legal Defense Fund gets involved. So while they're duking it out in court, the University of Alabama digs through Polly and Lucy's backgrounds and discovers that Polly is married and that she was pregnant when she got married. So big strike against the respectability, obsessed Legal Defense Fund and the Black middle class at large. Nagin Brown says, and I quote, "Middle-class Black women had long sought to combat claims of Black cultural inferiority, family pathology, and sexual immorality by endorsing and enforcing a strict social and moral code. Educated and upwardly mobile Blacks police sexual modesty and urged conservatism in behavior, dress, and manners. These Black strivers ostracized promiscuous women and disapproved of non-marital pregnancy. Conformity became a type of resistance." Now that is wild, and my knee jerk is niggas were getting the shit gaslit out of them. Okay. Now that is wild, and my knee jerk is niggas were getting the shit gaslit out of them, but I digress. Anyway, to add insult to injury, Polly's husband had also served time, so it was just like a wrap on Polly. They dropped her like a hot griddle. And it was one thing for Polly to be dropped just on the basis of strategy, like we're trying to get these schools integrated and we got to play these white people's games, etc. But it was more than that. And that's demonstrated by how Polly is treated by Motley after she had been dropped from the case. Nagin Brown goes on to say, and I quote, once at Lucy's request, Myers had tagged along to a meeting with Motley and Shores. Shores is the other lawyer. Motley greeted Lucy warmly and with open arms, but she looked at Myers unsmilingly. She then turned away from Myers, escorted Lucy into Shores' office, and closed the door. Myers was heartbroken. And in a later interview regarding this case, Motley flat out said, "We knew then what we know now. Only exemplary Blacks are acceptable." The problem is this mentality is still omnipresent in our society, and I think that the proof of that is not only in the existence of Blackish, but also in its success. 175 episodes, 8 seasons is proof that we as a society value the concept of Black excellence, possibly above Black humanity at large. Black people face this impossible dichotomy of being systemically dehumanized for hundreds of years and then overcorrecting that by forcing our existences to be pristine and flawless, which I would argue pushes the pendulum to the other side of dehumanization. Because humans do make mistakes, because humans do make mistakes, but they are more than their mistakes. And humans are also brilliant, but they aren't brilliant all the time. We've never been afforded to just exist in the gray area that is humanity. And I don't think our participation in this oppression is just for white people. I would argue that most Black Americans do ascribe to this need for Black excellence as well. I had this conversation, shout out to the brilliant nigga that is Shavonda Sisson, about when your child comes into a space, is the first thing you do critique them or greet them. You greet them by addressing what they are lacking instead of greeting their humanity. So like, instead of tucking your shirt, go wash your face, I can smell your breath. It's like, good morning. I am so happy to see you. How did you rest? You know what I mean? Conformity as resistance is also just insane to me. Conformity as survival, perhaps, but resistance is resistance. We have to stop pretending like other things are resistance. They are not. And I know I am playing a dangerous game by critiquing a Black woman who lived and survived in a time that I can only remotely begin to conceive of. And I hope that I made it crystal clear earlier in this lecture that I agree with the rest of the world that Constance Baker Motley was a bad bitch, like a giant among men. I guess my question really is just like, in all of this, who benefits from Black folks continually contorting their humanity? And is there a future where Blackness, in all of its shortcomings, in all of its stratification of thought and experience, can be celebrated at large, can live outside what whiteness wants or requires it to be? That's my time. Thank you for engaging with this. Please like, subscribe, share, whatever else is included, and the humiliation ritual of begging you to engage with content. I also have a Patreon that is linked in the notes if you want to become part of that. The Trap Poet Society, shout out to the Trap Poet Society. I will see you all again whenever I am done with another one of these. All that I can tell you is that I worked on them diligently. This one doesn't even completely feel done to me. I'm curious to see what you all will say in the comments. But either way, thank you so much for hanging. I'm so grateful to be able to do this. I'll talk to you guys later. Goodbye.